Hello, everyone, and welcome to my informational Renata YouTube video. It's been a long time coming. I had successfully recorded this one time prior and found out after the fact that I didn't have my sound on, so you couldn't hear me. So that was really sad. And that put me off of this a little bit longer than I intended. But I've been wanting to do a video going over Renata, her matchups, items, all sorts of good stuff like that, and hopefully help people enjoy playing her or get into playing her, that kind of thing. Um, so I'm Miss Parker, and I've been a Renata main since she came out. She's only a year old at this point, and she has a fairly low play rate considering how new she is. And there's a lot of players that still don't know how she works. I hear, especially in the Renata Discord, how do I explain to my teammates in low elo how her W works, or like how her R works and stuff. And I've definitely dealt with that, even in low plat where I'm at right now. I still occasionally get people saying I still don't know how that champion works. It's like, oh man, okay. So hopefully we can go through that stuff, and I can provide some clarity and insight to playing Renata. So let's get going.
You were regrettably expendable, my dear.
So this is just about me. I wanted to kind of explore that I have some credibility to playing her. I've played her only this season up to Plat 4. It's my first time reaching Plat. Last year, as you can see, I did make it to Gold. I believe it was low Gold last year. And I had played a variety of support champions. But this year, yeah, Renata only. And I hover around a 50% win rate. And this is a little outdated. But I'm still Plat 4, so it's still that. It just has more games that I've played, and my win rate might have changed a little bit. Same thing. And I did want to mention, before I go any further, that unless I give credit, all the artwork is mine. I've commissioned a lot of wonderful artists over the year since she's released. And I appreciate all of them who have made art of her for me. She's my favorite, and I'll go over like why I like her so much shortly. But yeah, so just wanted to mention that anything that doesn't have commissioned by or drawn by, it's drawn by me. So I'll continue. So I have pretty high mastery on her right now. It's 780,000. Like it's higher now, but I am number 7 in the world and number 1 in mastery in NA, which is pretty cool. And there's the date for when I checked that, so it's probably changed a little bit, but I take pride in having played her so much. And then it's talking more about my ranked season in 2023. You kind of can see what I'm doing. I think the higher creeps per minute is because I do go Relic Shield occasionally, and that that changes that a little bit. But I didn't want to hide like my faults. I'm a bad duelist with her. She doesn't do very much damage on her own, so if it's a 1v1, unlike with Lux or other supports, it's a lot harder to win those. So, definitely have to be an aggressive laner with her, though. I think that plays into her strengths the most, but I'll go over all of that. So, why Renata? I want you to feel like you can become the Chem Baroness of your dreams. She's technically an enchantress, but her shield is lacking. She doesn't heal. And her poke, like, it's decent, but it's definitely not the best. I've compared her to Lux numerous times. And Lex will always be, like, a good support to play. And technically, she's not an enchantress, but, you know. Like Lulu, for example, her shields are huge, and Renata's shields are pixels in comparison. That's just something you have to kind of come to terms with and be able to play around. So you kind of have to understand your strengths and weaknesses in that regard. Laning phase, you want to be as aggressive as possible. You don't want to be poked out. That's where Renata is not as good. You really have to just be going all in, otherwise she's just not. She gets poked out very easily. She gets outranged by most supports, so that's something to keep in mind. In late game, one thing you can always keep in mind is that Renata R scales with the enemy team. So if they're stomping, there's still a good chance that you can win the game if you land really good Rs and have them tear each other apart. You basically reverse sweep them with your ultimate. So that's another thing to keep in mind. I definitely don't give up hope if laning goes poorly, because there's still a chance that you can be able to carry with your ult. And it's a lot of pressure sometimes. It's really hard to get everyone hit by it. It's a slow ultimate and pretty easy to flash away from or cleanse. So that's something to keep in mind. And lane matchups, I'll explore ones that I dread playing against, ones that are like great for Renata, ADCs that are good with Renata, and opposing matchups that are just awful. But I think the main question in everybody's mind is like, why play Renata? Like, she has such a low win rate. I mean, she has been played in championships before, but definitely not a high play rate. And, you know, a lot of her kit can be countered by summoner spells or items. But to me, she's my favorite champion down to her personality and her unique play style. I think her play style complements her personality and lore really well. I've always been somebody who really enjoyed the lore behind the characters, and that's mainly the reason I played them. Not just because of their abilities, how strong they are, how meta they are. Yeah, she's a strong entrepreneur. She climbs from the dark and shadows of Zon to try to become something more. I think she's a really cool villain in that regard, and I mean, it's no secret how much I absolutely adore Renata. Like, oh my gosh, love her so much. But I think it's fun to kind of be able to roleplay this really strong woman who is running a corporation, i.e., like running your team, making shot calls with your W, turning fights around with your R, that kind of thing. If you want to learn a little bit more about like her personality and stuff, I recently just saw TV Skyen's Renata like video talking about her, why Renata or something like that, and it's really good. I think he really captures like the elements of her design, her voice lines, her abilities, that kind of thing. And if you're like wanting to get into her, I think that's a great place to start, because you kind of learn her background and why there's so much to love with her. But enough with that. So here's the table of contents for this video. The outline's pretty generalized, but we're going to discuss like her abilities, her playstyle, some basic combos. She's not too complex when it comes to combos, but it's fun to learn about. Some ideal matchups for her, plus counters. I'll discuss, learning how to time your W in fights, items and build path in runes. I'm pretty flexible with these, and I do change them from game to game. Discussing low elo, as I mentioned before, how to explain to teammates how to play with Renata, how her W works. And then the interesting interactions. There's a couple bugs with her ult or weird things that happen with it, and I had a lot of fun being able to try to make that happen and then record it so I can explain it in more detail. Some general support tips, and you can watch, there's so many videos about it on YouTube about where to ward and when to roam, things like that. So I'll kind of vaguely go over that. There's so much information out there from much better players than me who can give you more information and a more in-depth guide to that. My experience with climbing with Renata, like I've said, I've only played her, so I've locked into not so good team comps and been able to make it work or turn it around. I think you can play her no matter what if you're confident enough and you're savvy enough. I think you can make it work. Savvy enough. And then as an ADC, how you should play around a Renata. I'll kind of talk about that a little bit. And then I'll give the conclusion and my final thoughts. All right, so let's get into it. So let's go over Renata's abilities, starting with her passive. So the in-game description is Renata's attacks deal bonus damage to mark enemies. Renata's allies can damage marked enemies to deal bonus damage. So with every auto attack, you'll notice you do a little bit more damage, and then if you keep attacking the same marked target, it loses that until you auto something else and then auto them again. So you can't proc your own mark, basically, but you do get that initial extra damage when you attack. So you really want to focus on the right target with your autos, especially when fighting in bot lane with your ADC. Kind of be attacking the same target together to get the maximum benefit from your passive. I definitely heard a lot of people kind of saying it doesn't quite do a lot, her passive, and I do have trouble sometimes being able to notice the damage of it. But it's there, it's something to play around and consider. I think it could be kind of buffed, but I think it's interesting. It's definitely kind of fun to be poke the enemy, hit a minion, poke the enemy, hit him, and just be kind of bouncing around like that to get the most damage. Especially with high auto attack speed champions, they'll be proccing your mark like a ton. It's also good to kind of think about, objectives. This mark passive does apply to objectives. So being able to roam and do that is fantastic. So here you can see, just going back and forth, you see that extra magic damage that's done as you go back and forth autoing them. So if you bounce that between them, you get the maximum use out of it. Unless you have an ally that's just able to constantly pop your mark. Yeah, so that's something to keep in mind. It's great to try to be able to rotate for objectives and stuff to be able to get the most use out of your passive. So next, Renata's Q, Handshake. Renata sends out a missile, rooting the first enemy hit, and can recast the ability to throw the unit in a direction. So it's important to understand the best direction to throw the enemy. Do you just want to hold still and have them rooted there? Or do you want to use it to engage or disengage? You can throw the enemies together for a stun. It's a pretty short stun, but it is a stun. And there's a lot of options with it. And it has a block cooldown. So when you're in laning phase, you really want to only Q if you're confident the enemy jungler isn't there, or if you're pretty confident you can land it, because it is a long cooldown and you will get punished when it's down. But when you do hit it, it's fantastic. So with your laning with a Jhin, for example, and you hit your Q, you might not want to throw the enemy right away. You might want to let him hit his W on top of you. Or let Caitlyn put a trap underneath them, things like that. So your first instinct is usually to recast it right away. I know mine is, and sometimes that'll lose us a kill. But you can hold it. It does last a little bit of time if you just hold them there with it. So that's something to keep in mind. And there's some limitations with it. It's kind of... it can be flashed over, and it is blocked by minions. So I've definitely like thrown out a Q. I definitely would have hit them, but they flashed towards me and killed me because the Q didn't hit. That's always so sad. Um, and there's been times where we get ganked, and if I land a good Q, I can flick the jungler away, totally cancel out the gank. So it's really good to kind of be paying attention to that. I did get just a clip of it to show. So you can see you can push them away. And the root does last a little bit, so you can push them into each other for a stun. So just something to keep in mind. Do you want to be able to throw them together? Will you hit both of the enemies together to land a stun? There's a lot of things to consider. If you don't hit the stun, you don't hit the Q, and you hit a minion instead, you can also flick the minion towards them for a little bit of damage. So it's not exactly wasted. It's just it has such a low cooldown that you want to be careful with it. Typically, when I'm in laning phase, I'll go E first, then Q, to be able to flash Q in, or just be able to surprise them with that. But it depends on the situation. So Renata's main thing, there's her W, her bailout. So Renata buffs an allied champion to fight harder, delaying their death and potentially saving them if they get a takedown. So timing this is so crucial because it only lasts so long when you put it on an ally, and it will expire. And if they die after it's expired, obviously they die like normal. It's a little tricky to time when you start. Even when like in plat, I'm still sometimes not getting it when I should. But laning with it, you have to be really careful because it also has a long cooldown. And you kind of want to be selfish with it in regards to prioritizing the most useful member to put W on. So if your ADC is not doing too great, if they're like certain to die pretty early on in team fights, maybe you want to put the W on your fed jungler or your fed top laner. Try to protect bounties from getting taken. Try to, if you think they'll get the most use out of your W, that's who you want to put it on. You're the boss, right? You're the boss. You get to decide who you employ to do your dirty work. So you put your W on the folks that you think will be able to do that for you and push your agenda. And a lot of people, have trouble understanding W. It does have more effects than that small summary does. W grants bonus attack speed and movement speed towards enemies. It's not often enough to warrant using it early when you could have saved them with it. I mean, if you're really fed, for instance, and you're really confident you can get a kill with your W just for that bonus attack speed and movement speed, and you don't have to worry about your teammate dying, then yeah, go ahead, use it. But it's usually best to save it for emergencies. And when explaining it to low elo teammates, the best thing to say is just keep fighting. Like, be aggressive, don't flash away. It does have on-screen effects when you put it on an ally. The effects are most obvious in Fright Night. You get like a whole border on your screen on that when you put W on allies. Slightly less eye-popping than Admiral and default skin. I mean, you can kind of see the effects on your champion as well, although if you're in the midst of a fight, it might be hard to tell. I've had people in low elo think that I killed them because I put my W on them, but you just have to remember that W, it's there, but it's not a guarantee, right? And if they don't get a kill or an assist, that they're gonna die. It's also possible to successfully get the kill, but then die after. You know, let's say they got ignited, you guys got the kill, but then the ignite puts them on the gray health and they die. And that's just something that happens. And with her W, there are some weird interactions with other champions. Kindred, for instance, I'll show clips of it, but if you put your W on her, there's a bug where if she ults when she has the W on her, it allows her to die in her ult. And I've accidentally killed my teammates like that before. So there's a lot of things to keep in mind. But usually you save your W until your teammate is almost on the brink of death, W them, and try to get the kill. The worst counters to it are enemies flashing away so you can't kill them, or stopwatching so you can't kill them, or, you know, things like that. But it's a very, very strong ability, and I think it does warrant a higher play rate on her for sure. Kind of hard with the W to showcase it, but you will see it in my other clips of it for sure. So Renata's main poke is her E loyalty program. Renata sends out a pair of Chemtech missiles, shielding allies and damaging and slowing enemies hit. So it's important to consider lining up the ideal E, you know, trying to shield as many allies as you can while dealing damage, or you know, that kind of thing. If you might need to consider, like, do you want to shield or do you want to damage with it? It's not like a stunning amount of damage, but the slow can really help with catching enemies or, you know, trying to engage. There is downsides to it. There's a very lack of a shield. Even if you go full support, maximum shielding, it's pretty abysmal. It will not compare to other enchanter supports, and that's just what you have to play with. I mean, in turn it does damage, but you know, it's just something you have to play around. But it can turn the fight around because you could shield your whole team if they're in the right position, kind of thing. So it's just, that's just Renata for you. So here you can see showcasing, trying to line it up so I can hit the most enemies and shield my ally at the same time. And you can see I went full support builds with redemption and all that good stuff, and even then it's, yeah, it's that. So it's good to you know, keep in mind there. But I usually you don't max it. Usually you put like 3 points in and then max W, or max E. It's usually you want to max W, but because the mana cost for Renata's abilities are insane, and E quickly racks up high mana cost in no time. So that's something to keep in mind, especially with Renata. She has a pretty low mana pool to play around. So, yeah, it's definitely a detractor. So, Renata's are hostile takeover. Renata sends out a wave of chemicals, causing any enemy's hit to go berserk. And berserk is just 100% attack speed, attacking allies. So it's pretty hard to use at first. It's large. It's a large R, and it does go some distance, but it is very slow. It's very predictable, and very easy to dodge. And there's a lot of champions her R won't affect if they use a certain ability. So Wind Wall completely blocks it. Brahm's E completely blocks it. Samir's Wind Wall blocks it. Milio's R cleanses it. Spell Shields obviously block it. Nocturne and Sivir. And then Neela has her Veil. I think it's her W, where she protects her and allies from auto attacks. So that basically nullifies your ultimate. And Zeri's a direct counter to Renata's R, because she technically has those little zaps for auto attacks, and she mostly does all her damage and farm through Q. So if you hit her with your R, she's just gonna do those weak little zaps, and that's a really, really big counter for that. So usually when I play, I ban Zeri, so I don't have to worry about that late game. I also want to mention R on its own does not do any damage whatsoever. It doesn't do like magic damage upon hit. It fully relies on the enemies attacking each other. So the more fed they are, the more damage it does, and you want to hit it as many of them as you can with it. So items and summoner spells, Quicksilver Sash, Mercurial Saber, that cleanses it. Obviously, cleanses it. So those things can be built. Mikhail's Crucible cleanses it. And that'll be frustrating when you do see enemies doing that. But you have to remember, usually they can only cleanse either themselves or one other person, and you still have the rest of the team to hit. So that's kind of how I cope with it. Oh man, how many like Sivers I've seen? So they already have a spell shield, but then they go and do cleanse as well on top of it, and it's just like, wah. It's just no fun allowed. And timing her R, it can be a great engage. It can be a great way to secure objectives because the enemy jungler is berserked and can't get it. It's game changing. It's really like, it often falls on you to be able to win the fight if you can land your ultimate. So don't go willy-nilly like throwing it out, because if the enemies can see it, highly likely the carries will flash away from it, completely nullifying your ultimate. Nothing feels worse than saying like, oh, my greatest product, and throwing out your R and it hits nobody, and you just see it travel along slowly, and it's like, oh no. So it's very important to time it. Often I let the team fight start happening before I ult because everybody tends to group together for team fights. Hopefully the ADC will kind of move in to do damage and you can hit them with your R. Best spaces you can do it is in tight spaces in the jungle, Baron Pit, Dragon Pit, all that good stuff is great ways to kind of guarantee everybody gets hit by it. It's kind of funny when you see Silas steal your ult. They are often surprised by how clunky it kind of feels, how slow it is, how easy it is to dodge. So that's always kind of funny. Yeah, I feel like I had something else to mention about that. But yeah, so that's her R. It also does trigger minions to attack. The enemy champions will attack wards as well. So I know there's like a priority list hanging out somewhere on the internet where it shows exactly what the enemies will target, when hit by your R. And the last thing is usually yourself. But you have to really be careful with it too, because let's say it's you and your teammate and you come across the fed enemy kill. If you ult and there's no minions for her to attack, she is going to tear you apart with her auto attacks, right? Because what you're doing is you're just buffing her. You're giving her 100% bonus attack speed. And if there's nothing else for her to hit, she does hit you. So I've had, teammates ping my R when I didn't use it, because the circumstances will just guarantee we die faster. It's awful. But don't hesitate to use it sometimes too, if you can get like kills off of it. The R, the Berserk prevents enemies from using abilities. So if you're trying to kill a mage, for example, use your R. And even though their auto attacks don't do very much damage to their allies or whatever's around them, they can't use their spells. So that's something to keep in mind. I just remembered what I was going to say as well. Invulnerable, obviously. They won't get hit by the R in that case. So I was trying to think of like Viego. It's really annoying if he's getting his R reset and you ult and you miss it because yeah, that's annoying. There's a lot of ways it can be avoided. You just have to really use the element of surprise or give them no chance to react to it. Is the best I can recommend. All right, so Renata combos. So she's pretty straightforward when it comes to combos. Like I know a lot of other champions have way more complex combos than this, but there are a few things you can do to surprise the enemies with. So first is her QE combo, very straightforward. You can basically guarantee your E hits if you land your Q. So you can kind of Q and then E right away to do as much damage as you can. Very straightforward. And then there's QR. So kind of same premise. You land your Q, so then you can land your R following it. You do have to be pretty quick on the draw with that. I do have a clip. So you Q R very quickly because the route is pretty short. So you'll Q R before they can hopefully react and flash away. And another thing you could do is Q, throw them into their team, and while they're stunned, then you are. Very, very straightforward. Next is the R flash combo. And this one's interesting because even though it says when you cast your R that you're channeling, Renata's R cannot be canceled unless you're killed. So you basically, no matter what, as long as you're not dead, you'll cast your R if you hit the button. So it's nice. So when you're landing against like an enemy Ashe or something, as long as you hit your R beforehand, if you get slammed with her arrow, you're still casting that no matter what. Which is really it's really nice. So in that sense, when it comes to the R flash, you start channeling your R first and then flash, and it'll cast wherever you are. So very classic, you can flash forward to hit as many people as you can with your R and try to prevent them from having a quick reaction time. You can also do like flashing over the wall with your R, things like that. It's probably I use that combo the most, I think, honestly. When it comes to surprising people, the thing you want is to give them as least of a reaction time as you can. So you want to just do what you can with that. Another thing is you can flash backwards. So let's say you're getting turret over something, you can start casting your R and then flash back. So you can hit the enemies that are behind you, or try to move as far away as possible before you're dove, things like that. It's really handy. I think her flash is so important to her kit. And for those who like playing off meta things, I have tried with like Gale Force and Proto Belt to see if you could cast the R and then use the item. It doesn't seem like it. So maybe if you hit it on like the right frame, you can. I don't know, but from what I could tell, you can't kind of do that sneaky stuff. So Renata has a bunch of counters, and I have mentioned them previously. Obviously, cleanse, spell shields, wind walls, black shield, quicksilver sash, all that good stuff. She has a lot of counters, which is very annoying, but you just kind of play around it. It's not too big of a deal. I know a lot of people say she's very situational, and I agree with that. But I think if you're good enough, you can always make her work to some degree. I've gotten into games where, yeah, they don't have a lot of auto attackers, but because they can't use their spells that does all of their damage when I hit the R with them, that wins us the fight. So I think she's always useful to some degree. And if you enjoy playing her enough, that's something to keep in mind. I think you can pull her off. And I mean, her W is always going to be useful. So just don't let people try to tell you you can't play her or that she's situational or she doesn't work in certain comps. I think if you enjoy her enough, you should play her no matter what. Because we're all just playing a game to have fun, right? That's the main goal here. But she does have a lot of synergies in that regard. Champions who have excellent auto attacking, champions that can reset. So, you put your W on Viego, it's very easy for him to kill enemies with his ultimate resets, so he can save himself and keep going. Callista's great because she can throw you into ult, and you can cast it before she throws you in. You do have to really coordinate that unless you're just good at telling. Or, she can throw you in and then as soon as you land R, so they can't react. That kind of thing. It's yeah, and as funny as it is that Zeri is a counter, she's also a wonderful synergy. She really benefits from anybody who gives her attack speed and movement speed, and being able to also be able to save herself because she's very likely to get kills is wonderful. Belveth's very strong too because of her passive. If she does manage to get a kill and get the W reset, she can heal off of her little statues or whatever it is. Tryndamere is super strong. Any bonus attack speed on him is great. And if his R had worn off, basically you give him another temporary R for him. So there's as many counters as she has a lot of great synergies. So always prioritize the strongest members on your team to save them. I usually W myself last, unless I think that's the best situation. So in team fights, let's say I know that I'm gonna get focused down because usually you build pretty squishy on Renata. So I'll W myself, expecting them to go on to me and trusting in my team that they'll be able to kill in turn and bring me back. So you can be very strategic with it. Just kind of do your best to expect the fight to go a certain way and go from there. So runes, you can be pretty flexible with her. These are the two more likely runes I go. Either Guardian or Summon Airy. I've done Arcane Comet. It's fine poke wise, but I feel like her shields and all that goodness can use as much help as they can get. So I like Airy. I also like the bonus damage it does when you auto attack. So that can be good for poking. Really, though, it depends on the lane matchup. So heavy poke lanes such as Lex, Lulu can poke a lot. Brand, Ares the best because it is low cooldown. It boosts your shield to some degree, and it's a low cooldown rune. Unlike Guardian, it has a super long cooldown. Usually, I just use that for enemy lanes that are going to want to try to burst us all at once. So Pantheon, Nautilus, Thresh, I like to use it. Things like that. I feel like you get the most use out of Guardian. And I also like having her a little bit tankier, usually. So that I prefer to go Guardian, but Summon Airy can work a lot too. It also depends on your playstyle. If you're a little bit more timid, it might be best to go Guardian. If you're super aggressive, you're walking up, Summon Airy. That benefits you. It really depends on that. She's great because she has rune flexibility. I've heard other Renata players go Hail of Blades or Lethal Tempo so they can get the most use out of their passive. and just be constantly laying on stacks for their ally to burst. It's really up to you. And I know that I enjoy Grasp on her sometimes. The extra damage from your auto is great, and I love it. I love her being tanky. So, yeah, there's a lot of options and a lot of great things with her. In build paths, same thing. Very, very flexible. Most often, you're probably going to go Cerulea's. That's the most common build. But it really, when you want to consider a lot of things, are there a lot of assassins? Locket's the way to go. Tanks, if you want to be able to kind of properly play around them, then Cerulea's good. If your ADC is fed, usually Cerulea's good because you want to push your advantage. Your team comp too. Who do you want to be funneling? How do you want to play around them? If your carry is kind of squishy or can get caught out, you might want to go block it so you can protect them the best you can. And then of course your play style. Are you kind of being engaged? Then maybe Locket is better for you. If you're kind of working from the back and shielding your allies from the back, then yeah, Shirelia might be the way to go. The movement speed is really nice with Renata as well, so you can kind of rush in and ult, try to catch them with that. Redemption's nice because she doesn't have a heal in her kit, but you can give her one. You can make it work. And so you can tell this is a little bit older because Mandate is no longer I don't remember what they call it now, a mythic. So basically you can stack that with any other mythic and it'll be fine. I don't usually go Imperial Mandate though. I'd say my most common is the Shrillier Locket, but I've gone Even Shroud before and have had success with that because if they have a lot of hardcore engages, let's say they have a Moo and Nautilus or like things that are going in and CCing you, Even Shroud's great for that. Usually my line of thinking is I want to survive as long as possible, so I usually go a tanky build to complement that because otherwise I'm useless, right? If I'm dead and can't W anybody, then what's the point? So typically I like a tanky style because of that. Radiant it's interesting, it's kind of fun, it's very expensive though. Compared to the support item, so it does take longer to get. So that's something to keep in mind. If you're super fed, yeah, you're making enough money, you can probably get it if you want to. But it's up to you. It's just, if you get bored of building the same things, there is options. Moonstone, it's not the best. And then they did introduce the new item, Echoes of Helia. It's fine. It's okay. I end up usually missing the utility of Shirelia or Battle Song when I go Echoes. So it's up to you. It can work. It's got good poke and it does buff your shields, but I usually do end up missing activatable items to some degree when I do that. And then when it comes to picking your starting support item, you really want to ask yourself, what is the best way to make money in the laning phase? So if you're expecting to get totally outpoked by the enemy support, you want to try to avoid getting poked, right? So maybe you'll want to stand a little bit back and help your ADC farm with Relic Shield. If you're against, let's say, Thresh or other supports that aren't able to poke you as frequently, you can help farm as well with your ADC, or you can be more aggressive and be farming off of them, like melee supports, right? You have an advantage there, so maybe you want to be farming off of them and making the most money you can. Lately, because I've made the realization that she is best being super hyper aggressive, I've been going the Shard of True Ice because I know I'll get the best profit off of it. It's also because I like to try to roam for my jungle and I want to be able to make money off of that. But it really depends on your playstyle. and what the game's looking like, what the comps are. Oh, it's the fun one. So Renata R and W like really caused some interesting interactions with other champions, abilities, and items. So I've kind of compiled a list of the like most unique events and like provide my insight on that. And I do have videos of some specific events, but I'll explore this. So enemies berserked by Renata R will execute each other when they have the Elder Drake. So that can really turn around a game. I don't think you can execute them if you have a Drake and you ult, because it's not you doing the damage. So hopefully your team can clean up then, I guess. So obviously Renata's Berserk can be cleansed by Milio R, Cleanse Summoner, Quicksilver Sash, Mercurial Saber. Milio R is probably the most annoying because you can cleanse multiple people with it. So you just want to try to make sure you hit him with your R as well, so that he can't cleanse it. So Renata R is blocked by Samir W, Yasuo W, Sivir E, Morgana E, Braum E, and Nocturne W. If Nocturne goes in on you and your ADC, sometimes it's good to try to get his spell shield first by using one of your other abilities and then R'ing. Just expect them to usually use their spell shield right away, and then time your ultimate around that. Like I mentioned previously, Neela W does block auto attacks, including ally auto attacks when they're berserked. So wait till the veil is down and then you can ult. Renata R is not blocked by terrain. It's not blocked by minions or champions either. It goes right through them. Renata R applies enemy items and runes when berserked. So if the enemy ADC is collector, they can execute their allies with their collector item. They can proc their lethal tempo, press the attack, hail of blades. All of that can be procced when they're berserked, and so those effects will apply. When berserked, Zeri does her little auto attacks, which is her zap instead of her Q. Renata R does not affect targets that are unstoppable. Renata R, once you click it, it cannot be cancelled, even when Renata is CC'd, so excluding dying. Even though she technically channels her R, the animation will always go through, so no matter what, as long as you don't die, it's going to cast. Renata R does apply on-hit effects from enemy champions onto their allies. So Braum and Nautilus passive, Leona Q, Teemo poison, things like that, they will be put on their allies. So I recorded some interactions with friends to kind of give a little showcase. And I do mention that you can stop most engages with Renata Q. It really depends on timing, but it is possible to flash over it, so that is something to keep in mind. So let's see, we've got Leona. So you can see it really, you have to get the timing right with that. So she needs to start going through the animation for me to be able to stop it. I think the most annoying part about filming these was the fact that, you know, you can't do multiple people in training mode. So, you know, we had to wait for our cooldowns. Real time to be able to keep trying to use it. But you did notice that she will sometimes collide with me, even though technically I hit my Q on her. But it is possible to push her away. I often recommend casting Q as early as possible. Usually that's the best way to do it. Nautilus. I love going against Nautilus as Renata. So if you don't time it correctly, you kind of pull each other into each other, which is a little weird, isn't it? So you have to get the timing right with that as well. I mean, it's better than being pulled into him entirely. You kind of stop it halfway. But yeah, it's very timing sensitive. But it is possible to kind of push him away with it if you land it correctly. See, that was weird, right? But I have had times, and obviously it's hard because, I don't film all of my games. It's hard to be able to record such instances, but I have stopped him from engaging on me before when he Qs and I Q. So that's something to keep in mind. Rel is very easy to predict when it comes to queuing. Yeah, very simple. Just push her back as soon as you see the marker on the ground. They definitely kind of made it easiest for us in that regard. Oh, here's the classic Renata thing. You pull them under the turret with you. It's also kind of fun if you get turret dove and you W yourself and you hit the gray health and they die to the turret and so you come back to life. Best feeling ever. It's so good. Alright, Rengar, it is possible to stop his jump. That's why vision is so important. So it's also possible to stop Talon, other champions that can engage on you, things like that. Yep, just like that. Okay, and Rakan, this was a lot harder because Rakan W you can stop. Very, very specific timing though with it. So you notice with Rakan too that you can see the mark on the ground before he lands. And I think that's a crucial indicator. Obviously, you see you can push him away after he lands, but the main goal is to try to stop the engage entirely, which you can do. It is possible. It's just hard to do. See, it is possible. Just takes trial and error, right? So, some other interesting interactions that I'll showcase. Mostly with Renata's W and how that interacts with specific champions and items. So, Echo R and Renata W. I just was looking at it. There it is. So, let's say you're fighting, right? Echo still has R up, and instinctively, you want to W and try to save him, right? Like, you see, oh no, he's taking damage. So, you W, he hits gray health, and then if he Rs and doesn't get the reset, he still dies. So, it's very weird. It's hard because instinctively you want to W them to save them. And unfortunately, with specific champions, that doesn't always work. Because he had hit the gray health, and even though he ulted, he was still technically already dead. So it doesn't work. It's very sad. Kindred R with Renata W. So this is the one where we encountered the bug. And I had seen it happen to me before, and I just assumed it was a one-time thing, but I was able to recreate it. So, Renata, Kindred R puts you in a stasis, right? So this is what's should in my mind happen, right? And hopefully in that time you got a kill and um, got that reset. But what should happen, I believe, is that Kindred's in stasis in her R, so the health stops decaying, right? That's what I think should be happening there. But there are cases where that doesn't happen and she dies in her ultimate. Okay. So I have sadly killed my Kindred before because of this. And we tried like how soon I put the W on to see if maybe like I put it on too soon. But it is possible for the Kindred to die in her ultimate due to this bug. So you saw before we had her be invulnerable and saved and basically put the gray health in stasis. And other times she dies to it. So here I tried it earlier to see if that made an effect. And she died. Really weird. I'm not sure if they'll patch that. It has to be such specific circumstances for it to happen. But it does happen, and I have had it do both things. So it's just interesting. So next is Urgot R with Renata W. Um, to me, this interaction makes sense. This is what I would expect it to happen. You're killed, and then you hit the gray health, right? And so that's what I would expect to happen. So it's great with teammates if they get ulted by Urgot and eaten, and then they kind of are popped back out because they have the gray health. If they get a kill and resist, they do survive it. So that's kind of fun. I also want to mention that the gray health isn't like something that just goes down on its own. If the enemies are still attacking the ally, that does do damage to the gray health. So there are times when you do hit somebody with W, they hit the gray health, and then they're like killed really quickly anyway by the enemy team. So it's not like a total save all kind of thing. Zillion R. And in this case, it's also very similar to Guardian Angel. I was making sure I was recording. So he ults in the gray health, and technically, yes, he died, so he does revive. And that's just that interaction. So it's pretty interesting. You basically give them extra time to do stuff before they die. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. Guardian Angel is the same way in that regard. Most cursed thing you've ever seen, Zillion with Guardian Angel. So you see the gray health decays, and then they resurrect, just like normal. Yep, so that's that interaction. That's kind of useful when like your ADC is really fed and strong, and they do get their Guardian Angel procced. They still have a chance to survive there. Stopwatch, and in that regard, Zanya's does have that kind of stasis effect. It pauses the decay of your gray health. So if you need a second for the situation to change, you can stopwatch, and it does pause the decay. Obviously, if you still don't get a kill after that point, you do die, but it does kind of give you a little bit more time. Kind of interesting. So some general support tips, and I mean this applies to every champion. And like I said, there's a lot more knowledgeable people than me who give advice on this, so definitely check them out. But one good thing is to communicate your ward cooldowns. A lot of times, ADCs in low elo just sit on their wards and don't use them because they think you've got the vision under control, which is usually the case. But early laning phase, you are also limited by how many wards you have. So try to communicate and ping, like, hey, I've got this on cooldown. We don't have any river vision. Like, can you please give us some vision? Um, that's always good. Being able to ping enemy vision, super helpful with the jungler. You do have to set up the hotkey for it, but once you get it set up, super easy to use, and also you get that extra gold for pinging it, so very handy. Knowing when to place vision, again, this is another thing in low elo where you move to place vision and then the enemies go in on your ADC because they're by themselves, and your ADC doesn't realize they need to kind of back off when you move toward. So get the timing correctly with that. Oftentimes I'll like ping that I'm going, like ping my ward, and then usually they'll kind of step back so I can move to the river and be able to put a ward there. Buying control wards, I think they're very useful. Usually I always have at least one in my inventory. Later gaming phase, usually I'll just have, I'll only buy it for like the dragon or baron, and it usually kind of stays there for a long period of time. So I think it's very useful. It's definitely not something to like die protecting when the enemies are trying to take it. But it's kind of funny how many times you'll get kills because they are trying to defend their control ward, and you're able to just kill them because they're overextending. So don't do the same mistake. And being able to switch to scanner immediately after you get your support item, it's just something you want to rush right away. The worst thing is getting caught out because they had vision and you didn't realize. Usually I just play like I think they have vision everywhere. But you can confirm that with sweeping. Roaming, you definitely want to be watching the map for both ganks and possible roaming potential. Since you're support and you don't have to worry about farming as much, you can be able to ping more frequently if you see the jungler on the map. Ping it so your teammates see that. You want to be ready to be ganked. Since you're usually being more aggressive with Renata, typically you might end up being pushed under the enemy turret, so you want to be able to be ready for the enemy jungler to come. So have plenty of vision, be ready for that. It is possible to roam with Renata. Her Q, is very handy, but she is pretty slow, movement speed wise. I feel like other roaming champions are a lot more successful than her when it comes to that, but it is possible, so don't hesitate if you see an opportunity to try to roam. And be careful when roaming in low elo because oftentimes you'll leave and your ADC just gets killed because they couldn't sit under the turret for 30 seconds. So be able to like kind of ping when you're leaving, ping them caution when you leave, and just be watching for that. And try to help your jungler in the river as frequently as possible. Having that vision from the scuttle is super helpful. And positioning in lane, you want to be aware of the enemy range. I think Renata has the same range, auto attack range as Swain does. Though his E obviously isn't hindered by minions while your Q is, so you don't usually want to try fighting Swain for that. So just be aware of their auto range, whether or not you win that, and then you can take that in consideration when it comes to picking your starting item. You need to understand wave mechanics. You want to be ready for level 2, so usually what you want to do is push and try to kill as many minions as you can, so you can try to get that level 2 right away and be able to flash Q in or anything like that. You want to be able to have consistent farming on your support item, make as much money as you can, and that'll affect your play style. Obviously, you'll tend to be more aggressive with spell thieves, and a little bit more passive and defensive when you have relic shield, so keep that in mind. And when you're playing without a duo, it is difficult with Renata. She's pretty dependent on communicating, like my W is down, blah blah blah. It's a lot easier if you have a duo, but it is possible. You just kind of have to have trust in the ADC, and if they are not capable of carrying or don't seem like they know what they're doing, always feel free to try to funnel somebody else who you think can carry. Definitely want to be able to play around the strongest people on your team. So just take in all the other support things and, see how the ADC is playing. If they seem like they're just wanting to focus on farm, then don't try to go in and fight because they won't be able to follow up. The best thing for Renata is if the ADC you get is super aggressive and is autoing the enemy ADC when they get the chance and seeming like they want to be able to follow that up. That's the best thing for her. You can even tell them in chat to be aggressive, and hopefully that'll help if that's not the case. And then finally, it's a question of whether you want to be more aggressive or be more defensive. Again, that falls down to your runes, which item you pick, and then you have to consider risk versus reward. Obviously, if you are aggressive and it's against somebody who has a Soraka support and they're able to just heal it up, and you used everything to be aggressive, what was the point? So you just have to really play around that kind of thing. So climbing with Renata, I want to emphasize play to enjoy her. And this applies to every champion. It's not worth climbing if you're not having fun to some extent. If it's just super stressful, every loss you feel it and it's just really hard and it really sucks, then don't do that to yourself. I have so much fun playing Renata, even if I lose the game, and that's what I think everybody kind of should be hopefully aiming for. You have to experience both the good and bad matchups and learn how to play against both of them. And you'll learn from it. You'll learn how to play against it. And sometimes it's just you don't have good teammates, and that happens, and you lose games, and that happens too. But you're trying to have fun with her. So capitalize on your most powerful teammates. Put your resources on them. Understand your advantages and disadvantages with her. Be able to kind of understand that and accept it and play around it. So, lack of her shield with the E, be aware of that. Come to terms with it. Move on. Her R slowness, same thing. Be able to just understand that's the way it is. You can't change it. So until she gets buffed or something, that's it. Be flexible with your runes and builds. I think that's the most important thing. If you just keep doing the same build every game, I feel like that's not the recipe for success. I see the person with the most mastery on Renata almost always go Shurilias, and they never go lock-in or anything. And that's great, if you want to do that, that's fine, but I think you want to adapt to the situation. So if you're against teams that don't have many auto attackers, you can be more utility. Or, if you need to protect your team, go lock it. You can play around it. You can be adaptable, maybe when your teammates can't be. As in with any ranked games, don't hesitate to mute the other players. If they ping your W or ping your R and think that, you didn't use it properly, and that happens, of course it happens, but you have to trust your own decision making. The thing with ulting Kale when it's just me and my ADC and no minions or enemies, obviously I don't want to ult there. If we cannot kill her, without, anything, then obviously if I ult her, she's just gonna kill us faster. Trust that you know your champion more, right? You have to kind of have that faith in yourself. And if people are pinging you and bad-mouthing you, just mute them and move on. Trust in yourself, have faith in yourself. obviously, like, they won't usually have as many points on Renata as you, and that's just, something you have to remind yourself. They don't spend all this time playing with her, so be patient with yourself. Um, and like I mentioned previously, have fun. Like, that's what you want to. That's the main goal. Have fun hitting those fantastic ults where they attack each other. I've gotten triple kills from landing fantastic ultimates like that. It feels so good. Being able to save your ally with W and getting that thumbs up from them, best feeling in the world. You just live off of those kinds of things. Like, enjoy that, and like the positive interactions I've had on League outweigh all of the negatives ones. So the times that people tell me, God, Renata, or like things like that, it feels just so good, and I hold that so deeply to my heart. And I think that's how you should approach it as well. Obviously, if you do something poorly, learn from it. It sucks being like something pointed out that you did wrong, but definitely hold those positive interactions the closest. So, as an ADC, you might be wondering, how do you want to play with Renata's support? Renata's best advantage is when she's level 2. So as a Renata main, I want my ADC to be pushing for 2, be poking, that kind of thing. That's when I'm the best. Obviously, if it's not a good situation, that's fine. We don't have to go in every level 2, but it's usually what you want to be looking for. Another thing is, when fighting with W active, just keep fighting. If you see the effects on your screen, if you hear the sound, don't flash away, obviously. Usually the best thing you can do with Renata is just, when you fight. Like, don't try to run away. That's the worst thing you can do. You just want to be aggressive. So Renata, she doesn't do very much damage. Even if you go full AP, her E doesn't have great AP scaling. Her Q doesn't have great AP scaling. Her R obviously doesn't do any damage on its own. So you can't really rely on her damage output in that regard. But she makes up through like a really solid 2v2 duel matchup. Like, being able to save your ally or yourself with your W is super handy. So just keep that in mind. Going even, or like trying to out poke, isn't the best thing you could do. It's not to Renata's advantage. With Renata, you either are aggressive or you're just under the turret. Like, there's no in between. She gets very outpoked by a lot of champions, and like, you just gotta understand that. But she really does blossom when you're aggressive. Like, I've won against lanes who have really aggressive supports like Senna, Lux. If you go all in, usually there's nothing they can do. The worst thing that can happen is, like, Renata and you get totally poked out, you're low health, and her W, is only so useful to some degree. So another thing is, be aware of like how high the cooldown is on W. Hopefully, I try to ping when my W's down to prevent my teammate from running in willy-nilly. Obviously, that's something you might want to consider doing. When it seems like they seem like they want to fight, if they're positioning like that, communicate your W cooldown. And don't be scared when you're low HP. Like, that's Renata's, that's when she's the best. That's where she shines. If it's a good Renata player, she'll W when you're low health. You just kind of have to trust that she will. And if she's good, she will. And you might W yourself as a Renata. Obviously, try to do that only if it seems like they're gonna totally try to kill you first. Eat up as much damage as you can. Hopefully your team will kill them and revive you. But yeah, there's a lot of things to keep in mind. So, some final thoughts. I think Renata really provides like an interesting playstyle to the support meta. I think, being able to reverse sweep is really cool. And you just play off of the other team's advantage. Um, so being able to revive your allies or make the enemies tear each other apart is like super entertaining and super rewarding. You know, if you see Twitch uses his R and it's still active, right? It's active for an amount of time. If you hit him with your R, he's gonna be ulting his allies. Um, Ulting a fed kale, always great. Things like that. It makes it all worth it. Like, honestly, especially if they're like rude players or something, and it feels good to be able to turn that around. She also has a super like fascinating lore, like I mentioned. She's a super interesting character. And she's like super fun to play and learn about. Her music, her theme song, super good. Everything about her is just great. I just swoon. um, if you want to play her, like do it. Just play her. Don't let anyone tell her like her stats, like her win rate or anything, or what's meta. If you like her, play her. That's all I could say. And obviously, I've liked her enough to play her as much as I have and put myself through playing ranked and doing this whole video. So I think if you really like a champion enough, you could pull her off anywhere. So keep that in mind. I think all of you can be the chem barons of your dreams if you put your mind to it. And hopefully with my videos, I can provide some insight to getting to that point. So yeah, thank you all for watching my video today. I hope you learned something. Let me know if you have any like thoughts or feedback in regards to this. Obviously, I'm not a full-fledged videographer, and I'm like, this is kind of my first time recording something like this of this length, for sure. So let me know if you have any thoughts. I really appreciate you listening, and hopefully you learned something. Hopefully maybe you feel inspired to play her more. I have so much fun playing her, ranked, unranked, in any lane, in any position. Not jungle, but any position otherwise. She's just the blast. I love her. Alright, so I'll let y'all go. I hope you have a great day. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.